Late at night, in a pristine office tower, a CEO opens a door and finds two little girls scrubbing the floor in silence, alone, exhausted, and not supposed to be there. What he uncovers next will shatter everything he thought he knew about his company, his past, and himself. One secret, one mistake, one night that changed lives forever. Would you have walked away or done what he did? If this moment moves something in, you drop a like, subscribe, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? And is it morning, noon, or night on your end? Nathan Whitaker hadn't planned on returning to the office that night. The board meeting had dragged on until well after sunset, and by the time he left the conference room, his head buzzed from the polite warfare that passed for corporate discussion. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was quiet. Too quiet for a building that was supposed to be closed after hours. As the doors slid open, Nathan stepped out, the soft click of his leather shoes echoing in the glass hallway. The city lights blinked outside the tall windows, a grid of wealth and ambition glittering in the dark. He made his way toward his office to grab a folder he'd forgotten, loosening his tie with one hand while scrolling through unread emails on his phone with the other. That was when he heard it. It was faint at first, barely audible, the scrape of something rough across tile. Then came a soft, dry cough. Nathan stopped walking. The sound didn't belong. No night crew was supposed to be working past 9, and certainly not up here. He paused, listening. There it was again. A steady swish, brush against floor, then a pause, followed by a short, muffled wheeze. He followed the sound past the executive lounge and turned the corner leading to the east corridor, the one lined with large conference rooms and polished marble floors. That's when he saw them. Two small figures' backs bent over, moving in unison. One dragged a heavy mop bucket that squeaked with every turn. The other scrubbed the floor on her hands and knees, head down, arms thin but determined. For a moment, Nathan said nothing. The girls looked too young to be janitorial staff, and as he stepped closer, the younger one looked up. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her hair was a mess of tight curls, tied back loosely, her cheeks flushed, eyes wide and dark like polished stones. She blinked at him, not afraid, not defiant, just quietly aware that she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. The older girl, maybe 10, stood quickly and moved in front of her sister protectively. Nathan saw her chin tighten. "Where's your mother?" he asked, more stunned than angry. The older one answered calmly, though her voice was hoarse. "She's sick. Couldn't come tonight. They said the floor still had to be done." "They?" Nathan asked. "The cleaning company," she said. "She works nights. Sometimes I help." He crouched slightly to meet their gaze, his eyes moving between them. There was a stain on the younger girl's sweater, a tear at the shoulder. The bucket was half filled with dirty water. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something else. Something tired. "You shouldn't be here," he said, quieter this time. "This isn't safe. This isn't even legal." Neither girl responded. The older one kept her hand on the younger's shoulder, steady but worn. Nathan glanced down the hallway. It was late, almost midnight. The office was empty. He could call security. He could call the contractor who hired out the cleaning crew. He could, and maybe he would. But first, he needed answers. Real ones. He offered them a ride. The older girl hesitated, but the younger one nodded before her sister could object. "We're hungry," she said, as if it explained everything. In the parking garage, he opened the back door of his black sedan. As they climbed in, he caught a glimpse of their shoes, muddy, too small, worn down at the heels. He turned the engine over and paused. "What are your names?" he asked. "Nadia," said the older one. "She's Mia." They rode in silence most of the way. Nathan stopped at a corner store still open and bought sandwiches, juice boxes, and a pack of wet wipes. He handed the food over in silence. The way Mia unwrapped hers and began eating without hesitation told him more than any report ever could. Their apartment building sat wedged between a chain-link fence and an auto shop. The stairs creaked under their weight as they climbed to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like old carpet and smoke. Nadia knocked twice on the door. After a pause, a voice from inside croaked, "Come in." Nathan stood just behind them as the door swung open. The room was dimly lit, a small lamp on the floor casting shadows across peeling paint and sagging furniture. A woman sat on the couch, hunched forward, wrapped in 2 layers of clothing. She looked up, blinking skin damp with fever. Her curls were the same as the girl's, tight, dark, but streaked with exhaustion. "Who's this?" she asked, coughing hard into her elbow. "I'm Nathan Whitaker," he said carefully. "Your daughters were cleaning my office." The woman tried to sit up straighter. "They weren't supposed to." "They said you were sick." She nodded. "I told them to stay home. They didn't listen. "You're burning up," Nathan said. "Have you seen a doctor? I can't afford to miss a night. If I miss one shift, they replace me." He looked around the room. An old heater rattled in the corner, a cracked window was covered in duct tape, and on the floor was a half-packed backpack with a school folder sticking out. "I can help," he offered, soft but firm. Her gaze sharpened. "I don't need charity. It's not charity. It always is," she said. "Look, I appreciate the ride, but we'll be fine." Nathan didn't argue. He nodded slowly, then looked down at Mia, who had settled on the arm of the couch and was watching him with the quiet intensity of someone too young to understand everything, but old enough to sense its weight. There was something in her gaze that unsettled him. Not fear, not hope, but the kind of knowing that children shouldn't have to carry. As he left the apartment and walked back down those narrow stairs, Nathan felt something heavy settle inside his chest. Not guilt exactly, more like discomfort, the kind that doesn't go away just because you look the other way. He paused beside his car, glanced back toward the building, and thought of the little girl's words. "We're hungry." He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing: he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen them. The following morning brought little rest to Nathan. He had barely slept, his mind cycling through flashes of the night before the two girls kneeling over cold marble floors, the feverish woman wrapped in blankets, the way Mia looked up at him through the cracked window as he walked away. He wasn't used to this kind of discomfort. Not the boardroom kind, not the abstract policy disagreements. This was something else. It followed him home, clung to his clothes, settled into the quiet spaces of his apartment. By sunrise, he was dialing his personal physician. Dr. Reynolds arrived within the hour. A silver-haired man with a calm voice and a practiced eye. He asked no questions about why they were visiting a run-down apartment complex in a part of the city most executives avoided. Nathan led him upstairs, pausing at the door, uncertain of how to announce himself. He knocked gently. It was Nadia who opened it. She didn't smile, just stepped aside to let them in. Inside, Carenza was still on the couch, curled under the same layers of sweaters and scarves. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin looked waxy under the dim lamplight. She tried to sit up when she saw Nathan, but he raised a hand gently. "It's all right," he said. "I brought someone to check on you." Dr. Reynolds greeted her professionally and knelt beside her with a small kit, checking her temperature, her pulse, listening to her lungs. After a few minutes, he looked at Nathan and gave a subtle nod. "Pneumonia, early stage. Not yet critical, but serious, if untreated." Carenza watched them both, suspicion flickering behind her exhaustion. "I can't go to a hospital," she said, her voice hoarse. "You won't need to," Dr. Reynolds replied. "I'll prescribe antibiotics. You need rest fluids and warmth." "I don't have insurance," she added, eyes narrowing slightly. Nathan stepped in. "The visit's covered. Don't worry about it." She looked at him, then really looked at him for the first time. Not with gratitude, not yet, but with a kind of reluctant curiosity, like someone trying to read the fine print of an unexpected contract. After Reynolds left, Nathan lingered awkwardly in the kitchen, noticing how little food there was, how mismatched the dishes were, how Mia had drawn a smiling sun on the fridge with a worn crayon. Nadia sat quietly reading from a tattered library book, while Mia was crouched on a chair, fiddling with the toaster. "It sparks sometimes," Mia said without looking up, "but if you press the side real slow, it doesn't burn." Nathan watched her push the lever with delicate precision. When the toast popped up slightly golden, she grinned. It was a small thing, but it lit up the room. He laid out some groceries on the counter, fruit cereal bread. Mia ran to inspect it like it was a birthday surprise. Nadia didn't move from her book, but her eyes lifted for a moment, just enough for Nathan to catch the silent thanks. She wasn't ready to speak. As they sat down for breakfast, Mia munched loudly, then suddenly looked up. "Are you our new dad?" she asked, crumbs around her mouth. Nathan nearly choked on his coffee. "No," he said gently. "I'm just someone trying to help." She nodded, unfazed. "Mom said people only help when they want something." "Do you want something?" That caught him off guard. He stared at her for a moment before answering. "Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do." Mia seemed to accept that, then leaned over and whispered loudly to Nadia, "He's not a bad one." Nathan smiled, but inside, a knot tightened. He wasn't sure what kind of man he was anymore. Later that day, back at the office, he asked his assistant to pull Carenza's employment file. He expected a short record, but what he received unsettled him. She'd been working off the books for nearly a year, hired through a third-party cleaning vendor. No benefits, no protections. Technically not even an employee of the company. Her pay was barely above minimum wage, and there was no mention of her ever receiving sick days or holiday pay. He called HR. The woman on the line sounded disinterested. If she's a contractor, she's not under our system. Liability isn't on us, she said flatly, but she works in our building. Still not our responsibility, sir. It's the vendor's job to manage their own hires. Nathan hung up without replying. He stared at the report again. There was something infuriating in its clinical tone. Everything legal, everything correct, but none of it felt right. It was like reading a recipe for injustice. He leaned back in his chair, remembering Mia's question. Do you want something he didn't know? Maybe he wanted to feel like his company wasn't built on the backs of people no one noticed. Maybe he wanted to believe he could still fix something. That night, he drove back to the apartment without calling ahead. He told himself it was to drop off more supplies, maybe check on Karenza's progress. But truthfully, he just couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something, and stepping back wasn't an option anymore. Nadia opened the door again, this time with less hesitation. Inside, Mia was drawing on the floor with a pencil stub. Karenza was awake, sitting upright, her color slightly improved, but her eyes still heavy with fatigue. She gave him a nod, neither warm nor cold. Thank you for the medicine, she said quietly. He nodded. How are you feeling? Still tired? But I think I'll live. Mia piped up. She yelled at me this morning. That means she's getting better. Karenza rolled her eyes, but smiled a little. Nathan set down a bag of soup and vitamins on the table, then turned to leave. Wait, Karenza said. He paused. I don't know why you're doing this, and I don't like owing people. You don't owe me, he said. She nodded slowly. All right, then thank you. It wasn't much, but it was something. Nathan left the apartment with a strange calm settling over him. Not peace, but direction. In the days that followed, he found himself watching his office building differently, watching how the maintenance staff entered through back doors, how deliveries arrived without anyone noticing, how people like Karenza moved like ghosts in a building made of glass. He started noticing things he had trained himself not to see, and at night, when he couldn't sleep, he kept thinking of a little girl with toast in her hand, asking hard questions with the ease of someone who'd had to grow up too fast. Nathan hadn't intended to revisit the matter so quickly, but something about the way Mia had looked up at him that morning, crumbs on her cheeks, eyes too old for her age, had unsettled him. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was recognition. A feeling he couldn't explain, as though he were being invited to see something he'd spent most of his career looking away from. He spent the early part of the day reviewing contracts, flipping through vendor agreements, searching for any clause that might give him a reason, an opening, to justify making Karenza a full-time employee. By mid-morning, he sent a message to HR requesting a review of her status. He kept the email short, professional, almost sterile. Please advise on the eligibility of Miss Karenza Elliott for a transition from contracted janitorial support to part-time or full-time custodial employment. The reply came faster than expected, crisp and unambiguous. At this time, we don't see a culture fit for internal hiring. She is not under direct company payroll and therefore not eligible under current policy. That phrase, culture fit, sat in his inbox like a stone. He read it again and again. Then he stared at the screen, not moving, letting the weight of those two words settle across his chest. He knew what they meant. He didn't need a glossary. It was the kind of polite rejection that passed for neutrality in places like this. Places where everything looked fair on paper, but nothing felt fair in practice. Later that day, he found himself standing at the edge of the maintenance corridor near the parking level, watching silently as other contracted workers moved back and forth, with carts, supplies heads down. Most of them were women, most of them older, many of them people of color. They moved like shadows through the glass walls of the company he'd spent his life helping to build. That evening, he visited Karenza again, this time bringing soup and a few library books for the girls. Mia opened the door before he knocked. Her smile was quick, her energy infectious. Karenza was sitting up, wrapped in fewer layers, sipping water slowly. She looked better, still pale but alert. I heard you tried to get me a job, she said without preamble. Nathan hesitated. I made a few inquiries. They turned it down. I'm sorry. She nodded slowly. I'm not surprised. You ever try getting hired while black and tired? Her tone wasn't bitter. It was matter of fact, like she'd said it before to herself, to others, like it was a law of nature. You're qualified, Nathan said. You're more than qualified. I had a scholarship once, she said. Linguistics. I wanted to be an editor. Fix a people's words, make them stronger. Thought maybe it was my way out. What happened, I got told I wasn't a good fit. Didn't blend in. They used different words, too assertive, too aloof, not collaborative enough. But I knew what it meant. Nathan didn't respond immediately. He studied her face, the way her eyes stayed fixed on the chipped mug in her hands. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter this time. "Don't be," she said. "You didn't make the rules. You just grew up comfortable in them." Mia, who had been sitting nearby coloring, suddenly spoke without looking up. "Is this the right color for me?" Nathan turned. She held up her drawing, a family of stick figures, each labeled. Hers was in brown crayon, slightly darker than the others. "Or is it too dark for school pictures?" she asked. Carenza stiffened. Nathan took a slow breath. "It's perfect," he said. "You're perfect." Mia blinked. "But the teacher says the lights in the gym don't catch our color right. She says maybe we should use peach next time." Nathan swallowed, a bitter taste rising in his throat. "No," he said firmly. "You don't need to change who you are to fit in a picture." Carenza didn't speak. She walked over, gently taking the paper from Mia and setting it aside. "Baby," she said, crouching down, "your skin is the color of history. It's the color of strength." Mia didn't fully understand, but she leaned into her mother's shoulder. Nathan watched them, a quiet ache blooming in his chest. Not pity, something more personal, a realization creeping in from the edges of denial. That night, he sat in his apartment reviewing hiring practices, not just the letter of the law, but the silent assumptions that shape decisions. He looked through photos of staff events, counted faces, noticed patterns he had once ignored, and for the first time he wondered how much of his success had rested on silence. At the office the next day, he walked into HR with a printed memo, not an email, a face-to-face request. He asked for a formal review of all contractor transitions over the past 2 years. The room went quiet. No one said no, but no one smiled either. Back in his office, he stared out the window, his reflection overlaying the skyline. Behind him on the desk was Mia's drawing. He hadn't meant to keep it, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. There was something haunting in the way the little brown stick figure stood apart, smiling anyway. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed a number he hadn't used in years, the head of compliance from his early days. Maybe it was time to ask better questions. Maybe it was time to start seeing the things he had trained himself not to see. Because once you heard a child ask if her skin was too dark for a picture, you couldn't unhear it. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Nathan allowed himself to bring the girls to his office. It wasn't planned. He had stopped by to review some documents that couldn't wait until Monday. And when he asked if Nadia and Mia wanted to come along while their mother rested, both of them had lit up with excitement. They had never been in a building so tall, Mia said, nor in an elevator with buttons that glowed gold like treasure. Nathan didn't correct her. There was something sacred about her awe, and he found himself softening in ways he hadn't anticipated. He set them up in the corner of his spacious office with markers and paper, then turned to his desk, sorting through files. The girls were quiet for a while. Nadia read, curled into the leather guest chair, her feet not quite touching the floor. Mia wandered eyes scanning every shelf and picture frame, the curiosity in her movement reminding Nathan of someone he couldn't place. She paused near the far cabinet where old photographs and awards gathered dust. She leaned closer to a frame, her fingers leaving faint smudges on the glass. Was this a party, she asked suddenly? Nathan looked up. She held a photo he hadn't noticed in years, him younger, standing next to a group of colleagues at a conference hall. He smiled faintly. Something like that. A language conference, Denver. Long time ago. Mia tilted her head. Mom went to Denver once. She told me she met someone there. Said they talked all night. Nathan froze. His pen hovered above the page, not moving. He slowly looked up, trying to mask the sudden rush in his chest. She did, Mia said. She said it was the first time she felt like someone really listened to her. She didn't say who, though. Said it didn't matter. It was just one night. Nathan set the pen down. His fingers curled slightly like they remembered something before his mind did. A vague pull at the back of his thoughts began to surface, images jumbled blurry, like photographs soaked in rain. A hotel bar, dim lights, the weight of grief sitting heavy on his chest. His mother had died the week before. He'd gone to the conference out of obligation, numb, barely functioning. He remembered the clink of a glass, the smell of wood polish and citrus, and then her. A woman, young, smart, her voice textured like aged paper. Not flirtatious, not searching for attention, just present. She had corrected his use of a Latin root in conversation, and when he challenged her playfully, she laughed in a way that wasn't performative. She said, "I love words, but people never let me finish mine." They had talked until the bar closed. Then they walked the hotel halls, still talking. She told him about growing up with books instead of toys. He told her about not crying at his mother's funeral because he didn't know how. They sat near the elevators until 2 or 3 in the morning. He remembered that, but he didn't ask her name. Neither of them had. There was a strange freedom in anonymity, and back then, he wasn't looking for permanence. In the early morning, his assistant had called to say his flight was moved earlier. He'd written a note on hotel stationery, left it with the concierge. He signed his full name, added his number, then rushed to catch the plane. She never called. He had forgotten the details, filed them away under 100 other conference memories. But now, with Mia's words floating in the air and that photo in her hands, the edges of that night came into focus with startling clarity. He took the frame gently from her, studying the background, the banner reading National Symposium on Linguistic Innovation. He remembered her saying she had a minor in phonetics. Could it really be? His pulse ticked faster, not from panic, but from the kind of anticipation that borders on disbelief. He turned the photo over, hoping for a date. There was none. Mia had moved back to her seat and resumed coloring, unaware of the storm she had stirred. That night, Nathan sat in his apartment lights, dimmed a single glass of scotch untouched on the table. He searched his email archives, typing in every variation of the word Denver he could think of. He found the flight itinerary, the hotel confirmation, even the scanned receipt for a drink at the Elms Hotel bar. But no names, no last messages, no evidence of the note he had written. He rubbed his face with both hands. It didn't make sense. What were the odds? But then again, what were the odds that he'd find her daughters cleaning the marble floors of his office building 10 years later? The next afternoon, he returned to the apartment with groceries, vitamins, and a new sketch pad for Mia. Carenza was up folding laundry slowly. She looked better, still tired but steady. She offered a small nod when he entered. "I brought more cough drops," he said. She smiled faintly. "Good. I ran out last night." Mia came rushing from the bedroom. "I showed him the picture," she said. Carenza looked confused. "What picture?" "The one in his office. I told him about the man you talked to in Denver." Carenza's eyes flicked to Nathan. He stood still, measured. "You went to that conference?" he asked carefully. She nodded. "Years ago, my professor got me a sponsor badge, said I should network. I mostly sat in corners and drank free coffee." Nathan's voice was quiet. "Did you meet anyone?" Carenza didn't answer immediately. Her expression tightened not with suspicion, but with a sort of distance, as though measuring how much she wanted to share. "There was someone," she said. "One night. We talked. I don't remember much else. He was grieving. I was lonely. It felt honest, but people disappear." Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it. The pieces in his head were falling into place, too fast to process aloud. He didn't want to say something that couldn't be unsaid. Not yet. Instead, he helped unpack the groceries, set up the sketch pad for Mia, and asked Nadia about the book she was reading. He forced himself to move through the moment, to stay grounded, though 1,000 questions hammered at the walls of his mind. He drove home in silence, windows down, fingers tapping the steering wheel. There was no proof. Not yet. But there was a feeling, deep instinctive, that the past hadn't disappeared. It had simply waited, folded itself into the quiet corners of a life until the time came to speak again. The afternoon sun had started its descent, casting long amber streaks through the dusty blinds in the apartment. The girls were napping, and for the first time in days, Carenza found herself alone with a stretch of quiet. She moved slowly around the living room, tidying things she had already cleaned, folding and refolding the same blanket draped over the edge of the couch. Her movements were mechanical, but her mind wasn't still. Ever since Mia mentioned Denver, and Nathan's expression tightened just slightly, just enough for her to notice she had felt something stirring inside her, a friction of memory she hadn't allowed herself to revisit for years. She knelt by the bottom shelf of the old bookcase and ran her fingers along the spines. One of the books slipped sideways, a worn volume on the history of languages. She had kept it through moves and job changes, not out of utility, but sentiment. Sliding it free, she let the weight of it settle in her lap and opened to the back page where she used to tuck notes and scraps she couldn't bear to throw away. There, yellowed and folded unevenly, was a piece of stationery from the Elms Hotel. Her heart kicked. She hadn't seen it in years, hadn't even remembered putting it there. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. The ink was faded, but legible. I left because my mother had just passed. I wish I had more time to explain. If you want to find me, my name is Nathan Whitaker. No phone number, no email, just a name. Just the truth pressed into paper and forgotten under the weight of survival. Her breath caught sharp in her throat. She read the words again, more slowly this time. Her lips parted as if to speak them out loud, but no sound came. Her chest tightened, not in pain exactly, but in recognition. All those years ago, she had believed he left because he wanted to, because that night was nothing more than comfort between strangers. And maybe it was. But the letter changed something. It recontextualized everything. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes and blinked hard, refusing to let them fall too easily. She rose, letter in hand, and sat on the edge of her bed staring ahead. That night in Denver had been raw and strange and unexpectedly human. She had talked more than she usually did, laughed more freely, and for a brief moment she had felt visible, not managed, not tolerated, but heard. When he was gone the next morning, she had buried that feeling like so many others. She never tried to find him. What would she have even said? She thought it had meant nothing to him. But he had written. She pressed the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. The room was silent except for the sound of the old fridge humming in the background. Her mind wandered back to that night. His face now faded and younger, the way he'd leaned forward when she corrected his pronunciation, the way he had listened when she talked about her dreams. How he hadn't looked away when she said she was tired of always having to prove she belonged in rooms she had earned the right to be in. She didn't remember his name. She hadn't asked. Neither of them had. They'd let the moment exist without the burden of tomorrow. But now, knowing the name on that paper and knowing who Nathan Whitaker was today, she felt a swell of something she couldn't name, grief, perhaps, or wonder. Maybe both. She could confront him. She could show him the letter and watch the realization dawn. She could force the conversation they had never finished. But something in her resisted. What if it unraveled the careful balance she had built? What if the truth didn't change anything? What if it changed everything? She folded the letter again, slower this time, more deliberate. She slid it back into the book, but now she knew exactly where it was. It no longer lived in the fog of forgotten things. It had rejoined the present. The girls stirred awake. She rose to check on them, smoothing Mia's curls gently, her fingers lingering longer than usual. Mia opened one eye, sleepy and soft. "Are we having dinner soon?" Carenza smiled. "In a little while, baby." She moved back to the kitchen and began chopping vegetables with quiet focus. When Nathan knocked an hour later, she was calm, composed. He came in with groceries, as he had been doing more frequently. They moved around each other in the narrow space, like people learning a new kind of dance. Comfortable, yet still cautious. "I got that oatmeal you said the girls liked," he said, placing a bag on the counter. "Thanks," she said. Her voice was neutral, but not cold. He glanced at her, sensing the subtle shift. Something in her gaze was deeper tonight, less guarded. She didn't mention the letter. She didn't need to. Not yet. They ate together, the four of them, at the small kitchen table. Nathan told a story about a vendor who delivered 10 cases of decaf coffee by mistake. Nadia laughed out loud. Mia asked if squirrels could eat pancakes. Carenza watched it all with a soft kind of disbelief. It felt almost normal. Later, after the dishes were done and the girls were tucked in, Carenza stood at the door as Nathan gathered his coat. "You're good with them," she said. Nathan smiled faintly. "They're good kids." She nodded, hesitating for just a breath, longer than usual. "Drive safe," she said, and closed the door gently behind him. Inside, she leaned her back against the wood and looked up at the ceiling. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long while, she knew the past hadn't abandoned her. It had waited folded neatly between pages she wasn't ready to read until now. Coming off the quiet weight of the night before Nathan sat in his office the next morning, staring at his screen, the cursor blinking steadily in an open HR query window. He had typed Carenza's full name twice, then erased it, both times unsure what he was looking for, or more truthfully, unsure whether he wanted to find what might be waiting. But the uncertainty gnawed at him louder than the clack of keyboards outside his glass walls, louder than the voice in his head trying to remind him this was a boundary he shouldn't cross. He clicked into the internal system, searching personnel records from across all divisions, keyed in her last name with a tight breath, and hit return. Within seconds, a listing appeared: Cherished Elliott, former employee, Regional Cleaning Services, terminated. He leaned forward. The record was thin. No phone number, no address. Only an employee ID and a note: termination due to breach of conduct policy. No details, no attached documentation. Nathan felt his shoulders tense. That wasn't standard. Every employee, especially in the case of dismissal, should have had a full incident report filed, something traceable. He flagged the file attached in executive override and requested a scan of any hard copy files associated with the ID. Then he stood and paced the room. He hadn't told anyone. Not his assistant, not Evelyn, not the HR manager. He didn't even fully understand why he was doing it. A part of him still clung to the story that maybe he was protecting the company, trying to ensure no future scandal, no loose ends. But the truth was quieter and heavier. He needed to know if he had failed her before he even knew her. A few hours later, a private scan landed in his inbox. A scanned PDF of a termination file dated 9 years ago. He clicked open and read. The official write-up was cold. Language of professionalism wrapped around accusation. Employee displayed conduct inconsistent with workplace ethics and demonstrated a pattern of boundary violations. Nathan frowned. There was no elaboration, no incident specifics, no witnesses, just a signed statement from a then-supervisor, Gerald P. Langley. Langley. Nathan remembered him vaguely. Mid-level manager, clean suits, slick talk, the kind of guy who bought expensive pens to impress interns. Nathan kept reading. Beneath the typed statement, scribbled in nearly illegible handwriting at the edge of the page, was one line: conflict escalated after she declined personal overture. He froze. His throat dried instantly. He read the sentence again, then again. The implication was unmistakable. Langley had made a pass. She had said no. And the rest, the report, the termination, was retaliation dressed up as policy. Nathan felt his pulse rise in his ears. He clicked to the final page. His own digital signature was there. 9 years ago, as a regional director, he had reviewed and approved the termination. It was routine. Dozens of decisions came across his desk every week. But this one wasn't routine anymore. He stood up abruptly, the chair rolling back with a sharp scrape. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, breathing shallow. He had believed for most of his career that he had been fair, that he had promoted merit, not politics, that he didn't need to talk about race or power because he didn't act on prejudice. But prejudice didn't always look like slurs or segregation. Sometimes it looked like silence, like convenience, like checking a box and moving on. Nathan ran a hand over his face. In all the years since, he had never once thought to question that file. He had never asked where that woman went, what her story had become. He hadn't connected the dots between the woman he fired and the woman whose daughters now sat at his breakfast table drawing pictures with his last name scribbled in the corners. He sat back down slowly, staring at the screen. The glow of his own signature looked different now, less like leadership, more like complicity. He whispered to himself, "I fired the mother of my children, and I didn't even know her name." He didn't know what to do next. Call her. Tell her apologize. Would it even matter? Could he fix something that deep? Would admitting the truth reopen a wound she had buried? Would it bring more harm than healing? Later that day, he pulled the physical file from archives under the pretense of a compliance audit. No one questioned him. No one even noticed. He stared again at Langley's name, now retired, his misconduct never formally acknowledged. The system had protected him, but it hadn't protected her. And Nathan had been part of that system. Driving home, he gripped the steering wheel, tighter than usual. His mind ran through every moment he'd shared with Cherished since she came back into his orbit. Every expression on her face, every guarded word, every hesitation. Had she known who he was? Had she recognized him? Was she waiting for him to figure it out, or had she buried it so deeply that she no longer remembered? No, she would remember. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room with the lights low, a glass of water in his hand, untouched for hours. The letter she found the night they shared her resilience. Since then, every piece wove together into something too painful to look at, yet too important to ignore. He had taken something from her job, her dignity, her safety. And now he had the audacity to share meals with her children, to laugh with them, to tuck them in at night. He didn't deserve it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the question wasn't about what he deserved. It was about what he owed. Tomorrow he'd start fixing it, even if she never forgave him. Even if the girls never called him Dad, he had to begin somewhere. The silence in the living room that evening was different. It wasn't the gentle stillness that often followed a long day or the comforting hush of tired children asleep upstairs. This quiet felt weighted like a conversation waiting in the dark. Nathan stood by the window with his back to the room, watching the city lights flicker in slow rhythm, a glass of water untouched in his hand. Behind him, the soft clinking of cups being stacked told him Carenza was in the kitchen. Neither of them had spoken much since dinner, not out of tension, but because both were carrying something unspoken. He turned slowly and stepped toward the doorway. "Can I ask you something? And I just need you to be honest with me," he said, his voice low but steady. Carenza paused. Her hands were mid-rinse under the faucet. She didn't turn. Her voice came out even calm. "You can ask." That night, years ago, the Elms Hotel, there was someone I talked to for hours. She made me forget everything for a little while. I've been thinking about her a lot lately. About that night. I didn't remember much at first, but then I started wondering. He exhaled. "Was it you?" Now she turned. Her expression wasn't surprised. If anything, it was sad. Softly, she said, "Yes." He stared at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" She dried her hand, slowly choosing her words. "Because I didn't know for sure until recently. I found your letter just a few weeks ago. It was in a book I packed away when I moved out of my mother's place. I didn't see it back then. I thought you'd left without a word, that maybe it was just one night to you." Nathan's brow furrowed. "But I left a letter." "I know," she said gently. "I didn't open the book. I boxed it up the next morning. I never looked back. I was confused, overwhelmed, and I didn't want to cling to something that wasn't meant to last." He looked down, the weight of it settling in. "I always wondered why you never called." "I didn't have your number," she replied. "And you didn't ask for mine. Neither of us thought past that night." Nathan nodded slowly. "So all this time, we've been circling the same truth, but never touching it." Carenza's voice was quieter now. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to disturb your life. You have a company, a reputation, a world. I didn't think there was space for something that messy." He moved closer. "But it's not just a past anymore. It's now." As if summoned, Mia wandered in sleepy-eyed and blanket-draped, holding her drawing pad. "Mommy, I forgot to show you my picture." She held up a sketch of 3 figures under a maple tree. One had glasses, one wore a long skirt, one had curls. Carenza crouched, smiled, and kissed her daughter's forehead. "It's beautiful, baby." Mia pointed at the tallest figure. "That's you," she told Nathan. "You have the glasses, and I gave you my birthmark too. See?" She showed her arm. Nathan's breath caught. He slowly pulled his collar aside, revealing the same mark. He looked at Carenza. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." "I didn't know," he whispered, "but I want to now. I want to be here, if you'll let me." "They don't need a hero," she said. "Just someone who stays." "I'll stay," he said. "I promise." The city outside buzzed quietly. Inside, a new beginning formed, not perfect, but real. The morning after their quiet confession, the air in the apartment felt lighter, as though something long buried had finally been named. Nathan rose earlier than usual, quietly moving around the kitchen, fumbling with the coffee pot, as if the act of making breakfast could anchor him to this new role he had stepped into. The girls were still in their pajamas, their hair messy from sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with bowls of cereal. Carenza leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching them with a soft look that held a lifetime of weight. Nathan cleared his throat. "Girls, can I talk to you for a second?" His voice was calm, but edged with something tentative, something careful. Mia looked up first, then Nadia. They exchanged glances before nodding. He sat down across from them, resting his hands flat on the table. "You know how families don't all look the same. How some dads and moms don't live together, and sometimes people join your life later than others." Nadia tilted her head, like a story that starts in the middle. Nathan smiled gently. "Exactly. Well, the truth is, I'm your dad. Both of yours." There was a pause, the kind of pause that lives in a child's heart when something you suspected suddenly becomes real. Mia blinked. "Like really, really?" He nodded. "Yes, I didn't know before, and I should have, but now I do. And I want to be part of your lives fully, not just showing up sometimes, every day." Carenza stepped closer now, resting her hands on the girl's shoulders. "We both want what's best for you, and if you're okay with it, we're going to make it official." Nathan reached for a thick envelope and opened it, laying out the documents on the table. His hands were steady, but his eyes flicked to theirs, watching every reaction. "We're changing your birth certificates. he explained. "We're putting my name on them. Not because it wasn't true before, but because it matters that everyone else sees it too." Mia leaned in, her voice quiet. "What if someone says it's not real because I don't look like you?" Nathan swallowed. "Then we'll show them the paper. And more than that, we'll show them how we love each other. That's what makes a family." The notary public arrived mid-morning, a woman in her 60s with thick glasses and a voice like warm gravel. She watched in professional silence as Nathan and Carenza signed the forms, then turned to the girls. "You want to add something?" she asked gently, pointing at the page. Mia took the pen and drew a crooked heart beside Nathan's name. Nadia added a little star. The notary nodded. "Now it's official." The weight of that moment settled quietly, not with fanfare, but with the calm satisfaction of something long overdue. Later that day, Mia sat in the back seat of Nathan's car, her small hand wrapped around his fingers. They were on the way home from school after an uncomfortable scene where a teacher questioned Nathan's authority to pick her up. "I had to call your mom again," Nathan said, more to himself than her. "We'll get this sorted." Mia's voice was barely above a whisper. "They said you're not really my dad. Because you're white." Nathan tightened his grip slightly. "That's not true, and I'm sorry they made you feel that way. Some people only see what's outside, but we know better, don't we?" Mia nodded, but her eyes stayed on the window. That evening, Nathan sat with the girls under the old maple tree behind the building. They had a blanket and 2 mugs of warm cocoa, and he had brought out one of their favorite books. As he read aloud, his voice low and steady, both girls leaned into him. When the story ended, Mia handed him a new drawing. This one had the 3 of them standing under a big tree, the branches curling protectively above. In the sky, there were 3 hearts, one above each head. "You gave us matching hearts," Nathan said. "So everyone knows we belong," she replied. He held the picture a moment longer than necessary, then folded it and placed it in his pocket. Inside, the legal papers were ready to be mailed, sitting on the kitchen table under a paperweight. They were only ink and paper, but tonight they meant everything. Under the maple tree, they didn't speak much more. They didn't need to. For the first time, they weren't asking for a place. They had claimed one, and no one could take it away. That morning, as the school bell rang and children spilled across the playground, laughter and footsteps filled the air. But Mia sat alone by the edge of the jungle gym, her sketchbook closed, hands still. A group of girls stood nearby, whispering not so quietly, "He's not your dad. You're brown." "He's not." The words hit her like a rock to the chest. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked down at her shoes and tried to disappear. Her teacher, busy organizing the class lineup, glanced over but said nothing. Later during story time, Mia didn't volunteer to read. At lunch, her food went untouched. By the time school let out, she was quiet, head low, backpack hanging off one shoulder. Nathan had come to pick her up again, but as he stepped inside the building, the security guard at the front desk held up a hand. "I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the list of approved guardians." Nathan took a slow breath. "I'm Mia Elliott's father." The guard's eyebrows lifted slightly. "We'll need to verify that with the office. I understand." Nathan kept his tone, even resisting the heat rising in his chest. He pulled out his ID, waited as the guard dialed Carenza, then listened as she calmly confirmed everything. A moment later, Mia appeared at the hallway entrance. Her eyes widened when she saw Nathan. Without hesitation, she broke into a run. "Daddy!" she shouted. The sound of that word coming so naturally stopped a few teachers in their tracks. Nathan crouched, arms open, and caught her in a hug that neither seemed ready to end. Around them, the hallway softened the usual edge of institutional rules, giving way to something more human. In the car on the way home, Mia didn't speak. She clutched her sketchbook in her lap, eyes staring out the window. They said, "You're not really my dad," she finally murmured. Nathan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Who said that, kids?" "At recess. They said I'm brown and you're not. And dads are supposed to match." He didn't answer right away. He signaled turn left, pulled the car to a gentle stop outside the apartment. Then he turned around, resting one arm on the headrest. "You know what matching means to me?" he asked. She shrugged. "It means I show up when you need me. It means I love you no matter what anyone says. It means I see you, and I'm proud to be your dad, whether or not we look alike." She looked down at her hands. "They said I don't belong." He reached for her hand. "Then I'll stand next to you until they can't ignore that you do." That night, Nathan sat at the kitchen table with a blank copy of the birth certificate amendment form. The quiet of the apartment gave him space to breathe, to focus. He carefully filled in each line, his handwriting steady. Father's name, Nathan Whitaker. Carenza watched from the kitchen, not interfering, but not absent either. Her presence was reassurance, not pressure. Mia wandered in carrying her sketchbook, then paused beside him. What are you doing? I'm putting things in writing. So, no one ever questions again who I am to you. She leaned against him, her cheek on his shoulder. Does it mean they'll stop saying stuff? No, he admitted, but it means they'll be wrong. And we'll know it. She nodded, then sat on his lap, flipping her sketchbook open. I made a new picture. He looked. It was a drawing of the three of them sitting under a tree. This time, his figure had eyes that looked a lot like hers. She had drawn freckles across his nose, just like the ones she hated on her own face. He smiled. Is that me? Yeah, I gave you my eyes, so people stop saying we don't belong together. Nathan swallowed the lump in his throat. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. The next evening, they brought a blanket out behind the building under the tall maple tree. The air was crisp, the sky dusted with stars. Nathan brought out a storybook, the same one he used to read to his nephew years ago. Mia and Nadia curled up on either side of him, their heads resting against his arms. As he read, his voice carried softly in the still air. He didn't read quickly. He didn't skip pages. He gave space for the words to breathe, for the girls to smile at the funny parts, to sigh at the sad ones. When the story ended, they sat in silence for a while. Then Mia picked up her sketchbook again. I'm gonna draw this, she said. Nathan chuckled. What, the tree? All of it, she said. The tree, the book, us. Carenza stepped out with mugs of warm tea, handing one to each of them. She didn't say much either, just sat close, her knee brushing against Nathan's. It wasn't romantic. It was something steadier, something earned. They didn't talk about the paperwork that night, or the school incident, or the doubts. What they had now wasn't defined by outside judgment. It was defined by presence, by promises kept by the quiet strength of staying. As the wind stirred the leaves above them, Nathan looked up. The tree was old, its trunk scarred, but its branches still reached wide. Kinda like them, he thought. Underneath it, three people sat close, unbothered by whether or not they looked like they belonged together, because in all the ways that mattered, they did. The headline hit the morning after, like a slap, crisp and calculated. CEO Nathan Whitaker, secret family hidden labor and a custodial affair. It was splashed across a well-known news site with the kind of tone that didn't aim to inform, but to scandalize. Below it were photos, one of Nathan walking hand in hand with Mia outside her school, another zoomed-in shot of Carenza holding a paper bag near the company's side entrance. Both looked harmless, but paired with the headline, they painted a different picture. Within hours, the story spread across platforms. The word affair trended, not because it was true, but because it sounded like it could be. Nathan found out from his assistant. Evelyn called a meeting 15 minutes later. The conference room, normally sterile and silent, buzzed with half-whispers and sharpened eyes. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, voice cool. We need to consider the board's image. And yours, she said, not hiding the implication. Nathan remained calm, though the pulse in his neck betrayed him. So the company's image can't withstand me having children. Evelyn lifted a brow. This is not about children. It's about ethics, optics. You're a public figure, Nathan. You're in the headlines for having 2 kids with a woman who worked nights in our building, without disclosure, without protocol. He clenched his jaw. There was no affair. We weren't employees at the same time. There's no conflict of interest. You're a white executive. She's a black woman who cleaned our floors. To the public, that's enough. Nathan stood. Then let the public hear the truth. From me. He didn't wait for permission. He scheduled a press conference himself. Not a grand stage, just a small room filled with company employees and local media. His voice shook at first, not out of fear, but because words carried weight when you meant every one of them. I didn't plan any of this, but I won't apologize for being a father, and I won't let someone else write my daughter's story. They're not mistakes. They're not headlines. They're people. He paused, hands open at his sides. I was wrong once. I signed a termination paper years ago without looking deeper, and the woman I signed off on, she turned out to be the strongest person I know, and the mother of my children. The room was quiet. No camera shutter, no cough, just silence holding breath. I'm not stepping down, not because I care about titles, but because walking away now would send the wrong message to every girl who wonders if she belongs, and to every boy who thinks he can walk away from his mistakes. I won't. I'm staying. for them. Later that evening, back at the apartment, the girls waited at the table. They had drawn a sign in crayon, "Welcome home, Daddy." Nadia had added a sunshine above the words. Mia had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands. Nathan walked in briefcase, hanging tiredly at his side. He saw the sign and stopped, not because of the gesture, but because of what it meant. They still saw him as theirs, despite the noise. Carenza stood in the kitchen, drying dishes slowly. He walked over and placed a kiss on her shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "I said what I had to say," he murmured. She looked at him, then something soft in her eyes. "I know. And they heard you." Mia ran up with the drawing, pointing. "See, that's you. And me. And Mommy." He smiled. "It's perfect. Even though we don't all match," she asked. "We match where it counts." He said, "In here." He pointed to her chest, then his. That night, Nathan tucked them into bed. No speeches, no lessons. Just the sound of pages turning and the warmth of presence. As he read aloud, the storm outside faded, not because it ended, but because it had no place inside this home. Not anymore. The wind that morning was soft and unhurried, brushing through the maple leaves like a promise kept. Sunlight filtered gently over the small picnic blanket laid out under the tree, where a simple lunch waited in containers that didn't match, and a family that finally did. Carenza sat with her knees drawn up, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Her eyes followed Nadia and Mia as they raced across the park lawn, laughter in their wake. Nathan sat nearby quietly, slicing apples, his movements unhurried, his eyes never far from either the girls or Carenza. There was a peace in his shoulders, not because the world had changed, but because he had. The days since the press conference had not been easy. Headlines had called him everything from irresponsible to brave. His inbox overflowed with support and scorn in equal measure. His board still grumbled about reputation risk, but none of it mattered as much as the quiet sound of his daughter's feet pounding the grass, or the way Carenza had let her hand linger on his back when passing him the dishes that morning. Mia plopped down beside him, out of breath. She grinned and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do we have to go back to school tomorrow?" she asked. Nathan chuckled. "Afraid so. But you'll survive. You've got your science project, remember, the one with the solar system." She groaned playfully. "Can you be the sun for me? That way I don't have to explain it. I'll just say my dad lights up everything." Carenza shook her head, amused. "That's dangerously close to flattery." Mia grinned. "It's science." Nathan looked over at Carenza and gave a small nod, his eyes asking for something that didn't require words. She raised an eyebrow, curious, but silent. He reached into the bag next to him, pulling out a small wooden box. Not velvet, not glittery, just sanded pine with a brass latch. Something real. "What's that?" Mia asked. He opened the latch and lifted the lid. Inside was a ring, not huge, not flashy. A smooth band with a single diamond set low and snug. He set the box on the blanket, then turned to Carenza, his voice calm but certain. "We never planned for this. Not the night we met, not the years apart, not the way we found each other again in the middle of things we didn't ask for. But here we are. I love you. Not just because you're the mother of 2 girls I would do anything for, but because through every hard choice, every held breath, you showed me what strength looks like. And now I want to choose you. Not because we have to, because we get to. Will you marry me?" Carenza stared at him. Her lips parted, then closed again. There was no drama in her reaction, just quiet. She reached out, lifted the ring gently, and held it in her fingers as though weighing not the diamond, but the life behind it. Mia whispered, "Say yes, Mama, please." Carenza's voice was soft, grounded. "Yes, but you do the laundry every other week. Non-negotiable." Nathan laughed, the tension breaking like glass in the sun. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her hand. Mia and Nadia burst into cheers and tackled them both with hugs. Later that day, as the sun dipped low, they created a time capsule. Just a shoebox, really, with photos, drawings, and the heart Mia had drawn next to Nathan's name on the amended birth certificate. They buried it under the maple tree with a promise. Mia said, "What if the tree falls down one day?" Nathan replied, "Then we'll plant a new one right here. Same spot, same roots. Because what we're building doesn't depend on what stands above the ground. It's what we've put into it, together." As twilight settled over them, Nathan opened a book and began to read aloud, his daughters curled on either side of him, Carenza's head resting against his shoulder. He didn't rush the words. He let each one stretch out and settle like roots digging deeper. They didn't need to say they were a family anymore. It was already written into documents, into pictures, into the soil, and most of all, into each other. On a bright weekend a few months later, the backyard looked nothing like it used to. Folding chairs lined up in clean rows, white ribbons dancing from tree branches, and a small wooden arch decorated with sunflowers and eucalyptus leaves stood proud under the shade of the maple. Carenza smoothed the hem of her soft cream dress, not quite white, not quite beige, but something warm and graceful in between. Her daughters buzzed around her like fireflies, adjusting her hair, straightening her bracelet, stealing glances at her shoes. Nathan stood at the far end of the yard, adjusting his tie for the 5th time, though it didn't need fixing. His hands were steady, but his heart wasn't. He glanced over the crowd, mostly neighbors, a few co-workers, and a couple of close friends. It wasn't the size of the wedding that mattered. It was the weight of the moment. The music started. Nothing dramatic, just a gentle piano melody from the Bluetooth speaker balanced on a windowsill. As Carenza stepped forward, time felt slower, not frozen, but suspended, as if the world had stopped and to witness something rare and well-earned. Mia and Nadia walked ahead, scattering petals with a seriousness usually reserved for spelling tests. Carenza followed, and when her eyes met Nathan's, the years of separation, misunderstanding, and struggle folded into something soft. They didn't erase the past, they just agreed to carry it forward differently. The officiant, a retired teacher from the girls' school, smiled as the couple joined hands. Marriage, she said, is not the promise of perfection. It's the promise to keep trying, even when the ground shifts beneath you. Nathan squeezed Carenza's hand. She blinked quickly, holding his gaze. Their vows weren't memorized. They weren't polished, but they were honest. "I didn't come into your life the right way," Nathan said, "but I'm here now with no intention of leaving again. Not when there's so much more of it I want to live with you." Carenza's voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "I spent so long doing everything alone that I forgot what it felt like to be held up by someone else. But you held steady. You stayed. And I want to keep choosing you every day." They exchanged simple rings. The girls clapped first, unprompted. The guests followed. Later at the reception table, an old picnic bench draped in linen, Mia raised a juice glass. "To our family," she declared. "To our beginning," Nathan added, looking at Carenza, whose smile came easy now. They ate, they danced. The girls pulled them onto the grass where they swayed beneath string lights. There was no grand spectacle, no fireworks, no catering, just a cake from the corner bakery and laughter that filled the warm evening air. Under the maple tree, a new family photo hung in a frame. It had been taken earlier that day. Nathan in his suit, Carenza in her dress, the girls in matching yellow skirts, arms wrapped around each other like they'd always belonged there. Because now they did. Thank you truly for staying with this story all the way to the end. If you've made it here, it means something in these characters touched you, perhaps a quiet reminder of dignity or the long road of healing we all walk in some way. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. And tonight, I hope you felt the weight of truth, the ache of injustice, and the quiet strength it takes to keep loving anyway. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below, share what part moved you, and let's keep this space open for kindness, for belonging, for real conversation. Your support means more than you know. If this story left a mark, consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who might need a little hope right now. It helps this channel grow, but more importantly, it helps stories like this keep being told with care, with honesty, and with heart. Until next time, thank you for listening, and may the next chapter meet you with the strength and resilience you carry. See you in the next story.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.